Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Latta, this restaurant, the Fort, is actually a fort that's been around for many, many years. And as Ms. Lobato pointed out, this was a restaurant where they even had a big event when the G8 came to Denver some years ago. And so what I think Ms. Lobato is trying to say is this kind of contamination can happen anywhere, even at the very nicest restaurants or just little places, and that's what concerns all of us. I want to ask both of you, Ms. Lobato, the food you ate was in, I think, July 11th, around the first part of July, correct?
Like him.
And Ms. Lewis, the food that you ate was at the end of May.
That's correct.
Correct? Mm-hmm. So that was maybe 6 weeks apart between the two of you when you had those. Do you think that that's and of course, the recall didn't happen until late August. Mm-hmm. So do you think that's an unreasonable amount of time to identify the source of the contamination and to get these products off the shelves?
Well, you know, it's funny. My sister Stacy and I were #1 and #2 case in Salmonella in all of California. And so for her and I to be the first and second, you know, to me, it seems like a long time, but to the person who's number 500, it happened maybe a couple weeks later when they found out, you know. So being the first and second person, of course, it's going to seem like a longer period of time than it would to somebody who got sick later.
But what I'm saying is, what you described was the bakery that made those tarts
Yes.
Had used a different kind of egg solution that day. So theoretically, it wouldn't have been that hard to figure out that was different, and then to look where those eggs came
True.
from and trace it back to the farm in Iowa, right?
True. But like as I said before, there's also 10 things on my plate for dinner.
Sure.
There's 10 things in my salad. There's the appetizer. So in fact, did it come from X, Y, or Z? It's hard to tell at that time until you start actually pulling out everything and researching it. So as they start researching it, then I do feel, you know what I mean, that it was done appropriately. But
Yeah.
you can't tell if it's this or this because there's so many different components to what you receive at a banquet.
Well, would you be surprised to know we actually can tell if it's this or this? And if you have a traceability system, you actually can trace it quickly. Part of the problem we have now is that the Food and Drug Administration, as you told Mr. Braley, they don't have mandatory recall authority,
Right.
and we don't have traceability, so it is harder to figure out where the components come from. But technologically, we have the ability throughout our food industry to be able to trace where things came from. So if they had taken all of the components on your plate and they had been able to trace them back,
Yeah.
it would have moved much more quickly. Does that make sense to you?
That seems appropriate, yes.
Yeah. And did anybody else from that graduation party get sick besides you and your sister?
There was, to my knowledge, another gentleman that got sick as well. We were at the graduation banquet, and then the next night was a prom, and people from that prom
Also
like,
got-
yeah, I believe
Also got sick.
Yeah.
So you know, you had a group of people that got sick. We saw this with some of the other outbreaks as well, the peanut butter and other ones, where lots of people were getting sick. And when you see a big group like that getting sick, it's something that the state health officials really pay attention
Absolutely.
to. And Ms. Lobato, did you want to add to that?
Well, I just wanted to say that the Department of Health for Jefferson County and for Denver were on my case while I was in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
They called 3 days in and wanted to know what I had eaten at the restaurant, what I had eaten for a week before. So I was very impressed at how fast they were on the situation.
Right. It's, you know, what we've been finding the last few years with these foodborne illness outbreaks, oftentimes it's the public health officials who identify it. They're the first ones. But because we don't have a modern food safety and tracing system, it takes many weeks to then track down where that came from. So if you had the components of our legislation that we passed sometimes you hear us sniping up here, but you know, we actually passed this bill in a bipartisan way through the House. And if you had that in place, once those state officials identified what it was, it would be a lot easier than to trace it back to its source, and it would eliminate many new cases of the illness because you could get the recall going much more quickly. Thank you. Thank you both for coming again.
Thank you.
Mr. Doyle, for questions, please.